There's a moment some people never talk about, but never forget either. A split second where the world goes quiet. Not peaceful, but eerie, unnatural. The tires screech, the chest tightens, the breath catches. You see the edge, you feel the void. And for just a flash of time, everything inside you whispers, this could be the end. But then, it isn't. The car swerves. The results come back clean. The pain disappears. You walk away shaken, stunned, maybe even laughing, saying, wow, that was close. And life continues. But somewhere deep inside, something doesn't feel quite the same. Maybe you felt it, that strange emptiness that follows a near-death moment, the silence afterward, the bizarre sense that reality tilted and then clicked back into place, almost like it realigned around you. Most people don't know what to do with that feeling, so they brush it off. They call it adrenaline, coincidence, God's will, luck. But what if there's more to it? What if the reason you didn't die is because in some strange, invisible way, you can't? This isn't wishful thinking. It's a real hypothesis within quantum physics. Not proven, not universally accepted, but not impossible either. It's called quantum immortality, and it suggests something radical, that in a multiverse of endless timelines, your consciousness might always find the version of reality in which you survive. Not because you're lucky, not because you deserve it, but because that's how observation works at the deepest level of the quantum world. The observer, the you behind your eyes, never experiences its own end. It simply shifts. Think about that. Every time you almost died, every time your story could have ended but didn't, what if it did end? Somewhere else. What if another version of you didn't make it? But this you kept going, waking up in a timeline where the crash didn't kill you, where the diagnosis disappeared, where you made it one more day? That might sound like fantasy, but if reality really branches endlessly and your awareness flows like water into the path of least resistance, then maybe death from your point of view isn't an event. It's a fork in the road that your consciousness always walks around. Of course, that idea raises bigger questions than it answers. If you always survive, then who dies? And if you never reach an end, what does it mean to be alive? What happens to identity, to memory, to purpose in a world where your story never fully closes? In the next part, we'll dive deeper, not just into possibility, but into theory. We'll explore how quantum physics, specifically the many worlds interpretation, lays the groundwork for this shocking idea, and why, according to some interpretations, you might never actually experience your own death. Let's step across that threshold into the science behind the madness. We've spent our whole lives thinking of death as an absolute, a full stop, a final chapter that no one skips. And in every practical sense, that seems true. People die, bodies fail, time marches forward. And yet, if you've ever stood on the edge and come back, or felt like you should have gone but somehow didn't, then you've touched something the textbooks can't quite explain. You've felt that strange continuity, that eerie flow of awareness that didn't break, even when it should have. It raises a quiet but revolutionary question. What if death isn't what we think it is? What if, from the inside out, you never actually die? To answer that, we have to step outside the familiar. Not into religion, not into mysticism, but into a realm where science itself begins to behave like philosophy, quantum physics, and more specifically, a radical interpretation of it known as many worlds. According to this idea, reality doesn't collapse into one fixed outcome. Instead, it branches infinitely. Every time a decision is made, every time a particle could go left or right, the universe splits, creating parallel versions, each one as real as the last. In one, the coin lands heads, in another, tails. In one, you catch the train. In another, you miss it. And in one timeline, perhaps, you die. But in another, you don't. That branching doesn't just apply to abstract particles. It applies to you, your choices, your fate, your survival. And that's where the idea of quantum immortality begins. It suggests that you never actually experience the versions where your consciousness ends. Why? Because in every moment of life or death uncertainty, there are always versions where you survive. And from the inside, from the perspective of your awareness, You continue on in those. The you that's reading this right now may have already died countless times. But you wouldn't know, because your consciousness keeps following the branch where you're still here. It's not about living forever in one body. Bodies age, they weaken. Eventually, something catches up. But the claim of quantum immortality isn't that your form lives forever. It's that your experience never includes its own end. That the observer, the awareness behind your eyes, simply never sees the lights go out. When the body fails, awareness doesn't stop. It just shifts, like a needle skipping to the next track. A seamless transfer you don't notice because you were never awake in the timelines where you died. Only in the ones where you didn't. Of course, this raises profound questions. If consciousness never ends, then what is it? If you always wake up somewhere, then what are you waking up as? And if every moment is a fork in the multiverse, then what does that mean for your identity, your choices, your sense of control? Are you truly steering your life, or just flowing into the path of least resistance? To understand how this works, not as metaphor but as mechanism, we need to dive deeper into quantum theory itself, into particles that are waves until watched, into experiments that change reality just by being observed. Because the next key to this puzzle isn't about immortality, it's about how observation shapes what's real. In the next part, we'll explore that science, the part that turns this idea from science fiction into something far stranger, and maybe far more true. To grasp how quantum immortality could even be possible, we have to enter a world where logic bends, where particles defy common sense, and where even reality itself becomes uncertain until someone's watching. This is the world of quantum mechanics, the physics of the very small, where everything we thought we knew about how the universe works begins to dissolve. At the heart of this strange science lies a simple but mind-bending truth. At the subatomic level, particles don't have fixed positions. They don't sit neatly in one place or follow a predictable path. Instead, they exist as probability clouds, a range of possible locations, velocities, and states. They are waves of possibility, and it's only when we observe them, when we measure them, that they choose a specific outcome. This is called the observer effect, and it changes everything. Imagine a coin in midair that never lands, just spins, forever uncertain. In the quantum world, particles exist in that kind of suspended ambiguity. Not until someone watches do they collapse into being, like reality itself waiting to be seen before deciding what to become. The double-slit experiment made this shockingly clear. When electrons are fired at a barrier with two slits, they behave like waves, creating an interference pattern, as if each particle passes through both slits at once. But the moment you observe them, they act like particles, going through one slit or the other. Just the act of observation changes the outcome. Now apply that logic to something much bigger: your body, your brain, your life. If observation creates reality at the quantum level, then what is doing the observing when it comes to you? This is where quantum theory collides with consciousness. Because if your awareness is a kind of observer, if your presence helps collapse the wave of possibility into lived experience, then perhaps your consciousness plays a far greater role than we imagine. Perhaps it doesn't just perceive reality, perhaps it helps shape it. Enter the many worlds interpretation, proposed by Hugh Everett in 1957. According to this view, every possible outcome of a quantum event actually occurs in a separate, parallel universe. The universe doesn't choose one outcome and discard the others. Instead, it branches endlessly into timelines where every possibility plays out. One version of the electron goes left, another goes right. One version of you stops at the red light, another doesn't. One version dies, another survives. And your consciousness, the observer, continues to travel into the version where experience continues, the one where you're still alive. In this framework, death is not a single moment. It's a point of divergence. From your internal perspective, you may never actually witness your own end, because the observer, you, never collapses into the version where experience stops. You only ever find yourself in the timelines where it goes on, again and again and again. But is consciousness truly an observer in the quantum sense? That remains the great mystery. Some physicists argue that the observer doesn't need to be conscious at all, that measurement can happen without a mind. Others, like John von Neumann and Eugene Wigner, believe the mind plays a crucial role, that awareness itself is the missing link between possibility and reality. The science isn't settled, but the implications are profound. If awareness does shape outcome, if observation does influence reality, then who you are being in every moment may matter far more than you realize. Not just emotionally, not just spiritually, but physically, foundationally. You are not just a passenger in this universe. You are part of the mechanism that makes it real. And if that's true, then perhaps the idea that you never die isn't magic or fantasy. It's the echo of something we've barely begun to understand, a function of the very laws that govern atoms and energy in space and time. But let's pause, because theory is one thing, lived experience is another. The next question isn't, is it possible? The next question is what it feels like. What would it mean to live in a world where your death always happens to someone else, but never quite to you? What would it feel like to survive every time, to wake up again and again in the version of reality where you're still here? That's where we're going next, into the timeline where you always make it out alive, and the strange silence it leaves behind. Imagine a world where you always survive. No matter what happens, the near misses, the accidents that should have been fatal, the illnesses that somehow disappear at the last minute, you find yourself waking up again, blinking into light, breathing, continuing. At first it feels like luck, then maybe like grace. But over time, if you pay close attention, it begins to feel like something else entirely. Like you're slipping through cracks, sliding between realities, being pulled forward by something you don't understand. It's quiet. This kind of survival, it doesn't come with fanfare or fireworks. No voice announces that you just bypassed your own ending. You just keep going. And maybe that's the strangest part. There's no proof, no memory of the moment where things could have ended but didn't. All you're left with is a feeling, subtle, eerie, hard to name, a feeling that says, something's off. That wasn't supposed to go that way. And maybe it didn't, just not here. If quantum immortality is real, then you are not the only version of yourself. There are others, countless others, who didn't make it through that crash, who didn't recover, who did take that last breath. But you're in the timeline where you did, and maybe you've always been, which means, from your perspective, you're living in a kind of invisible corridor, a path where you never truly vanish, where awareness never collapses, where death always happens elsewhere. But if you always survive, then what does survival even mean? If death never quite touches you, then how do you measure risk? How do you know what's real? How do you grieve when part of you wonders whether the person you lost is still alive somewhere else, living their own version of forever? It's a strange burden, to live in a world that keeps choosing you, to be the version of yourself that keeps waking up, again and again and again. Over time, that survival can begin to feel heavy, not because you want to die, but because you sense that something's being left behind each time you don't. Memories don't always line up. Feelings lag behind facts. Your body heals, but something inside remains shaken, confused. You remember brushing against the edge, but you can't explain why you're still here, and no one else seems to notice the glitch, the quiet impossibility of your continuation. If you listen closely, you might even feel it in the gaps, in the seconds where reality feels a little too clean, too silent, too thin. Like you slipped through a seam and landed in the next frame of existence. No one tells you that you've jumped timelines. There are no signs, only subtle mismatches. The coffee tastes slightly different. The air smells off. Someone remembers a conversation you're sure never happened. Tiny cracks in the world that hint at something bigger. And yet the continuity of self remains. You still feel like you. You still carry the same memories, the same longings, the same ache for meaning. But now survival doesn't just feel like a blessing. It feels like a question. Why this version? Why this timeline? Why you? That's the paradox of quantum immortality. It grants you endless survival without ever asking if you're ready for it. It keeps the light on but never tells you why. And sooner or later, that silence becomes deafening. Because if you really can't die, if your consciousness always finds a way to continue, then maybe the real weight isn't in death at all. Maybe the weight is in knowing that you're the one who always remains. The version left to carry every continuation, to wake up in the rubble again and again, and to make meaning from the aftermath. But this survival raises a deeper truth, one that isn't talked about often. It's the part of this theory that no one wants to admit. Because while the idea of living forever sounds thrilling on the surface, there's a darker layer underneath. A question that creeps in when the world keeps choosing you, even when you didn't ask to be chosen. In the next part, we'll open that shadow. We'll explore the unsettling side of quantum immortality, the psychological, emotional, and spiritual toll of being the one who always survives. Because immortality, for all its wonder, carries a cost. And sometimes the deepest truths live in the silence left behind. Immortality sounds like a gift, until it starts to feel like a sentence. The idea that you could survive every near-death moment, slip past every ending, and wake up endlessly in the version of reality where you're still breathing seems at first like the ultimate blessing. But what happens when that continuation becomes too quiet, too lonely, too full of questions no one else can hear? In a world where you always survive, something strange begins to settle in. You start to wonder, what am I surviving for? The people around you still come and go. Accidents still happen. Loss still touches your life. But you, the inner you, never truly disappears. And with each brush against oblivion that ends in survival, you feel it more clearly. Something keeps choosing me to stay, but the reason remains unspoken, the cost uncounted. The first few times, it feels miraculous, but eventually you begin to notice the fragments, the quiet dissonance, the creeping suspicion that you're not entirely in the same place anymore. People seem different. Words misalign. You swear the color of the sky wasn't always quite this shade. And deep inside, a quiet ache grows, a grief for the versions of yourself that didn't make it. You can't remember them, but you can feel them. The weight of their absence lingers in your bones. And maybe you begin to feel something else too, a kind of survivor's guilt, woven into the quantum fabric of your continued existence. It's not logical, not provable, but it's real. It's the feeling that you walked away from a moment you weren't meant to, that somewhere, some version of you didn't, and now without knowing why, you're carrying on, for both of you. But here's the cruel paradox. No one around you knows. To them, you're the same. Life moves forward. Bills still need paying. Conversations go on. But within you, something has cracked open, a silent awareness that the world is not as stable, not as singular, not as solid as it once seemed. And no one can quite understand the loneliness of that knowledge. You try to explain, and people call it anxiety, existential dread, trauma. But what if it's not a disorder? What if it's the natural cost of waking up in too many timelines? This is the part of quantum immortality no one romanticizes. The isolation, the weight of continuity without conclusion, the quiet feeling that you're outside the rhythm everyone else is living in. Still human, still present, but touched by something you can't explain, a frequency no one else hears, a pattern you didn't ask to see. It can be terrifying, not because you fear death, but because you no longer believe in it the same way. And that changes everything. It breaks the urgency. It dissolves the timelines. It erodes the simple comfort of finality. What do you reach for when there's no end to fear? What do you heal toward when healing never finishes? But there's another layer to this darkness, one that isn't about fear, but about responsibility. Because if you're the one who always continues, then perhaps you're also the one who must remember, the one who must integrate, the one who must evolve, not to escape, but to become something more than just a survivor. And that brings us to the next piece of this mystery, the one hiding beneath all the timelines, all the theories, all the silence. It's the piece we've barely touched, but perhaps the most important of all, consciousness itself. Because if you are the one who always survives, then what are you really? Not the body, not the story, not the timeline. but the observer, the awareness that moves between worlds. In the next part, we'll look at that awareness, what it is, where it lives, and how it might be the true traveler in this infinite, ever-branching multiverse. If you're not the body, because the body changes, ages, and eventually fades, and if you're not the story, because the story bends, rewrites, branches, then what exactly survives? What is the constant that moves with you through every close call, every strange shift in reality, every timeline where you're still here? That constant is consciousness, not thought, not memory, but the raw presence behind it all, the silent witness, the unblinking observer, the eye behind your eyes that never quite sleeps. While the world around you reconfigures itself, new cities, new people, new pains, this presence remains. And it's that presence, that unchanging core, that may be the real traveler in this quantum landscape. In quantum theory, observation plays a central role. As we've seen, particles don't become real until they're observed. Possibility collapses into reality not because of cause and effect, but because of interaction, measurement, awareness. And while scientists still debate whether a conscious observer is required, there's something undeniably poetic, and perhaps more than poetic, about the idea that your consciousness isn't just watching the universe unfold. It's entangled with it, embedded within it, shaping it even as it's shaped by it. If this is true, if your awareness is the axis around which reality bends, then quantum immortality becomes more than a theory. It becomes a mirror, not of matter, but of being. You don't survive by chance. You continue because your consciousness keeps flowing through every crack in the multiverse, through every collapsing wave, through every dying version of your body into the one that still breathes. It's like walking across a frozen lake that keeps cracking under your feet. But no matter where it breaks, you always land on the solid piece. You don't control the cracks. You don't stop the ice from shifting. But somehow your next step always finds ground. That's consciousness. Not commanding the universe, but dancing with it. Intimately, invisibly, uninterrupted. And maybe that's why death has always been such a mystery. Because we've been looking for it in the wrong direction. We think it's a cliff, a plunge, an end. But what if it's not? What if it's a moment of transition so seamless, so gentle, that you never even notice the shift? One moment you're falling, the next you're standing, breathing, continuing. No fanfare, no final curtain, just a quiet click into the next frame, the next breath, the next now. If consciousness is the real traveler, then the question isn't whether you die, it's whether you ever stop observing, whether there's ever a moment when you, as awareness, go fully dark. And quantum immortality suggests, maybe not. Maybe consciousness simply can't observe its own absence. Maybe awareness always finds its way back to presence, to aliveness, to continuity. That idea is both comforting and haunting. Comforting because it hints that nothing is ever truly lost, that a part of you, the most essential part, can't be touched by endings. But haunting too, because it means the journey never stops. There's no arrival, no final landing, just unfolding, just movement, just the silent witness walking through worlds. And if that's true, then the task isn't to chase survival. You've already mastered that. The task is to understand what this endless survival is for, what meaning can be made from it, what growth it demands, what healing it allows. Because if you're going to keep waking up in reality after reality, you might as well become more than just a passenger. You might as well become the author. And that brings us to a deeper pivot, from endless continuation to intelligent participation. If consciousness always survives, then what is its purpose? What does it want? What does it create? In the next part, we'll explore that question, not as theory, but as responsibility. Because the moment you stop fearing death, something else begins to rise. The call to live on purpose. If you're going to keep waking up again and again through timelines where you survive what should have ended you, then the question is no longer, can you survive? The question becomes, what are you surviving for? Because survival without meaning eventually starts to feel hollow. Repetition without evolution becomes a loop, and eternity without direction begins to taste like driftwood, endless, weightless, lost. Quantum immortality may suggest you'll never truly face an ending, but that doesn't mean you're here just to float. Continuity isn't the reward, it's the invitation. And that invitation is to live with awareness, not just persistence. To realize that just because your consciousness keeps finding the next frame doesn't mean you're meant to keep repeating the same story within it. Most people move through life trying to avoid death. They play it safe. They fear the edge. But once you realize that you may have already danced with death multiple times and still landed here, something deeper unlocks. You're no longer just avoiding endings. You're being asked to create beginnings, to choose them, to shape them. Because immortality without intention is inertia. But immortality with intention becomes transformation. And that begins with the smallest pivot. Asking why. Why did I survive that night? That crash? That illness? That emptiness? Why am I still here when I felt so certain I wouldn't be? Not from a place of guilt, not to chase some grand mission, but because if consciousness continues, if the field keeps making space for your presence, then perhaps there's still something you're here to experience, to remember, to offer, to evolve into. Purpose doesn't have to be some grand cosmic assignment. It could be as quiet as healing a pattern your ancestors carried, as gentle as breaking a cycle of fear in your family, as simple as being the first version of yourself who chooses love before defense. When you shift internally, even slightly, you don't just change your own path. You ripple outward. You send new signals into the field. You open new possibilities for every future version of you to walk through. That's not just survival. That's participation. And maybe that's why you keep waking up. Not because you're being spared, but because you're being called. Not because the universe favors you, but because it trusts you with this timeline, with this moment, with the power to shape the field not through force, but through frequency, through presence, through small, sacred choices made with full awareness. You don't have to know the whole map. You just have to know your next yes, your next number, your next step in alignment. Because if the multiverse truly branches with every choice, then each moment becomes holy. Each decision becomes a brushstroke on the canvas of infinite timelines. And your life? It becomes the art of tuning reality one breath at a time. This is how survival becomes service, how living forever becomes more than endurance. It becomes expression, expansion, contribution. You are not here to outrun death. You are here to embody life, deeply, honestly, repeatedly. But there's still one last question, a tender final piece of this journey. Because even when you understand the theory, even when you've made peace with the infinite, there are still days when fear returns, when the old timeline tries to pull you back, when you wonder if you're imagining all of this, when you feel the ache of memory, of loss, of what if. In the final part, we'll return to that place, the tender place where fear meets awareness. We'll explore how to live with this knowledge, not as a burden, but as a gift. Because if you really might never actually die, then the real challenge is learning how to truly, fully live. Maybe you've always known, not in your mind, but somewhere quieter, in the pauses between thoughts, in the strange moments of déjà vu, in the way your breath sometimes feels older than your body. That subtle sense that you've been here before, that something within you remembers more than your life should allow. You don't need to believe in quantum physics to feel this. You don't need to understand multiverse theory or wave function collapse to sense that you are more than one life, one death, one body. Because you felt it already, in the moments when you should have been gone, but weren't. In the mornings after you thought you wouldn't make it through the night. In the quiet certainty that something, some force, keeps bringing you back. Maybe it's not chance. Maybe it's not divine intervention. Maybe it's not even choice. Maybe it's just the nature of consciousness itself, to never observe its own end, to keep unfolding timeline after timeline, breath after breath, moment after moment. Not because it must, but because that's what it is. Unbroken awareness, the part of the universe that cannot look away from itself. And if that's true, if you're not just living, but being lived by this greater stream of presence, then you are already the immortal one. Not in the mythological sense, not in the egoic sense, but in the simplest, most essential way. You are the continuity, the thread, the awareness that witnesses all endings from the other side of them. And that means you are not fragile. You are not fleeting. You are not small. You are the field remembering itself through form. So what do you do with that truth? You don't chase it. You don't try to earn it. You live it. You let it soften the fear. You let it quiet the urgency. You stop rushing towards success or love or healing as if they're destinations, and you start moving through them as experiences. Here, now, already held, already known. You choose presence, not because it makes you immortal, but because it reminds you that you already are. You speak more gently, you breathe more fully, you forgive more easily, not because time is short, but because awareness is wide. Because you have already survived enough to know that love leaves a stronger imprint than fear ever could. You begin to live, not like someone who's running out of time, but like someone who is just now learning how to use it. You stop asking, will I make it? And start asking, what will I make of this? Because if you truly never die, then every moment is your canvas. Every breath is your invitation to paint with more color, more depth, more truth. This is not a call to certainty. It's a call to curiosity, to wonder, to the quiet art of walking through life as if something in you has walked through it before. Because maybe you have, maybe you always will. So when the fear rises, when the old beliefs whisper that you're not enough, not safe, not strong enough to hold this moment, come back to what you've always known. You are still here. And if you are still here, then the field has not closed. The timeline is still open. The observer is still observing. And that is enough. You don't have to prove your immortality. You just have to live like someone who remembers it. So if something in you feels clearer now, if there's a softening in your chest, a steadiness in your breath, a quiet yes inside your gut, honor that. You're already becoming it. If this message resonated with you, consider leaving a word in the comments, just one, that captures the energy you're stepping into. It might be trust, or ease, or something uniquely your own. Let that word be your signal and your starting point. And if you'd like to keep walking this path, I invite you to subscribe, not just to a channel, but to a frequency, to a space where people remember who they are and what they're here to create.